When I was asked to think about legacy, I began thinking first about the meaning of the word. Like so many words in the English language, this one has multiple meanings. I wanted to focus on the definition of living legacy, the impact that you have on people and places in your life. Because I believe that the way we live our lives is the way that we will be remembered. My name is Carolyn Holbrook. I am a writer, an arts activist, an educator, a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. I grew up on the south side of Minneapolis. Creativity and stories of my people are in my DNA. And I come from a long line of creative role models, women entrepreneurs, and educators. My great-grandparents, Alice and John Carriger, owned a boarding house in Lincoln, Nebraska in the early 20s, where they allowed Pullman porters to stay because those men were not allowed to stay in hotels. Her daughter, my grandmother, Blanche Carriger Lee, made hair products for black women so that we could feel beautiful. And her daughter, my mother, Joanna Catherine Lee Holbrook Barnett, followed in her footsteps and created a cosmetology program in the Minneapolis public schools, a program that is still going on, although my mother has been gone for almost a decade. I recently published a memoir called Tell Me Your Names and I Will Testify. I begin each chapter of the book with an epigraph, but I begin the book itself with a poem by the great Lucille Clifton. It's a poem about when she visited a cemetery in South Carolina, a cemetery that, like so many, pretty much everything in America, was built by slaves. But as she walked through the cemetery, she noticed that the slaves were not recognized. Their names were nowhere. And so she said in her poem, she said, "Please tell me your names and I will testify on your behalf." I go from there to telling a story of an ancestral spirit of mine who came to visit me. Her name was Liza. That's how she identified herself. I mean, this woman was something. She was all dressed up in this, pompadour and stuff. She was gorgeous. And she had her man on her arm. And she says to me, "My name is Liza. You have to tell our story." And I said, "Oh, man, what am I going to do with this?" I had no training in creative writing at all. But I figured, well, she made this command. I don't want her coming back, so I better follow it. So I began by telling stories of the funny things that my kids said and did when they were little, because I was living then in a situation that was very, very difficult. I had recently become divorced, and I had 5 children to raise on my own, and many times I had no clue where our next meal was coming from. But being able to write down those things that my kids did was a lifesaver. It truly did keep me sane. And eventually I started wondering if there might be other people who have the same issues, that they want to take creative writing or to do something else and may not have the means to do it. And I wondered, I wonder if there's, some way that I can be a conduit for some kind of something to help people. And my kids played at our local neighborhood community center, and the director of the center was a performing artist. He always had stuff going on in the community center. I mean, he had sports and, the average stuff that you expect at a community center, but he also had theater going on. He had music. He had visual art. Didn't have creative writing, though. So I asked him if he would consider offering creative writing classes at the community center. And instead of telling me yes or no, he put the onus on me. He said, "If you can find someone to teach a class, I will support you." Little did I know that would begin my 30-plus years of making the arts accessible and passing the value of community building with loving kindness onto my children, my students, and people that I have mentored. Also, without realizing it, my younger son, whose name is Julian, helped me begin my journey. He was in 5th grade back then. He's 50 years old now, but back then he was in 5th grade, which means he was about 10, 11 years old. He came home from school one day, and he told me that there was a poet visiting his class, and he overheard her telling his teacher that she needed someone to type her manuscript. So he referred her to me. You see, I had recently saved up enough money to buy a typewriter, and remembering the skills that I learned in high school, I taught my kids how to type and proofread, and we started a little home-based secretarial service, taking in primarily papers by university students. But the poet did come to visit me, and I typed her manuscript, and I asked her if she would be willing to teach a class in a community center, and she said yes. And true to his word, the director supported my effort. He hired the instructor, and he taught me how to publicize the class. And we both thought, yeah, you know, this will bring a few people from the neighborhood, you know, it'll be a really nice little thing. Wow, on the first night of class, people were lined up outside the door from all over the Twin Cities to take this class. And, excuse me, back then I didn't know of the awesome healing power of the arts, even though I was very much aware of how writing about my children had helped me through those dark, debilitating times that, you know, and I somehow made it through. But the knowledge that art is healing is well documented now, much better than it was way back then. And it would become clearer and clearer to me over time as I continued offering programming that was affordable yet professional. I wanted to make sure that whatever I offered could be, was just as high quality as what you may receive from an institution where you had to pay a lot more. That value continues to drive my work. And what the director of the community center did for me also drives my work. If someone comes to me with an idea for a program or something they want to do, and they seem serious about it, I do what the director did. I tell them, hey, I'll support you. Soon I began getting invitations to train people in what I was doing. So I gave tips and tricks, and I shared programming ideas, and it just sort of, after a while, began to realize that they were looking for something else, and I couldn't figure that out. It was just kind of puzzling to me. I thought they wanted me to teach them to do whatever I was doing, but a friend of mine said something like, nope, they want you to teach them how to be you. I thought, wow. I wasn't sure what she meant by that, but I knew it was something I couldn't do. Then she went on to say that the mainstream institutions, while very valuable, they tend to focus on diversity in a way that doesn't always empower the people. You know, we've all heard the phrase giving voice to the voiceless. Well, she said that what I'm doing is, I recognize that everybody has a voice already. I can't give anybody a voice. Everybody has a voice. Sometimes we just need to help them bring it out. And she said something like, that's what they're trying to get me, you know, teach them to do, whatever it was that they thought I was doing. But if nothing else, what she said confirmed my belief that the way we live our lives is the way that we will be remembered. This belief shows up in how I live my life. It also shows up with how I work with my students and with my children. We didn't have much when they were little, but it was really important to me that my children know that poverty was not a life sentence, that they can create their own stories. Over time, my children and I all attained good educations. Today, my children are following the example that I gave them with their own children. They are showing their kids by the way they're living their lives that they can do and be whatever they desire in life. 2 of my grandchildren are college graduates. 2 are currently in college. 1 is about to enter graduate school. And I earned my doctorate in creative writing and creative arts leadership at the age of 58. The American author, educator, and activist Parker J. Palmer said in his book, Let Your Life Speak, the people who plant the seeds of movements make a critical decision. They decide to live divided no more. They decide to no longer act on the outside in a way that contradicts some truth about themselves that they hold deeply on the inside. They decide to claim authentic selfhood and act it out, and their decisions ripple out to transform the society in which they live. For me, writing and teaching and creating opportunities for others is linked to lifting others up. I have an organization called More Than a Single Story in the Twin Cities that offers several streams of public conversations where artists and activists in the indigenous and communities of color discuss issues of importance to us. And we just published an anthology based on the last 2 years titled We Are Meant to Rise, Voices for Justice from Minneapolis to the World. In that anthology, there are 30 people from all those communities and more, just, telling their stories. And I also teach creative writing at Hamline University in St. Paul. In addition to that, I teach writing workshops in the community. It's just important to me to be able to connect with people who, like me, some 30 years ago, needed to tell their stories while they're living in traumatic situations. And I will always remember these 2 groups of mothers that I worked with for 3 years. One group were mothers of murdered children. The other were mothers whose children perpetrated the murders. Imagine the stories those women had to tell and how difficult it was for them to tell those stories. But they had a voice that needed to be let out, if to go nowhere more than into their journal and into each other's ears and mine. And it's just extremely important and healing to be able to tell your story. Today, I believe that I showed my children by example, which in turn they have shown their children, that one does not need to be stuck in a small space. If you are creative and strategic, you can make the most of what you have and allow yourself to grow and thrive. So I invite you to consider this question when you think of the legacy you want to leave. Who will you be while you do what you do? Author Maya Angelou famously said, let me try her again, go back. She said, I have learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you make them feel. So again, I implore you to ask yourself, who will you be while you do what you do when you consider how you want to be remembered? My friend's words showed me that without realizing it, I have been living Parker Palmer's words, where he says, people who plant the seeds of movements have decided to live divided no more. In essence, he is saying, how you do what you do is how you will be remembered. This is a photo that my granddaughter made me put on my tuck. It's like, after 30-some years, there's all this diversity of people looking at me like, wow, maybe I have done something worthwhile in this world. And maybe they are, getting something from it. So it is also important to consider that every step you take on your journey leads you closer to becoming the person you will be remembered by. Okay. Whoa.